let me bring in Ali Vitale, because Ali, I wonder if you have any color from what it was like inside the hearing room, particularly at a couple of moments where Mr. Bowers was visibly, audibly emotional, seeking to compose himself before talking again, specifically when it came to his faith and his faith in the Constitution, and how this has affected his family on a personal level, Ali.
Well, because those were the two prongs of this hearing. There was both the direct threat of violence and threats against these election officials, including Rusty Bowers, that were detailed at length, not just in Arizona, but in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia, things that we knew about at the time, but hearing the people at the center of them talk about how their kids were home alone and protesters were outside threatening them. They had to disconnect their phone lines. That was one key piece. And then, of course, the other, which is this false slates of electors strategy being detailed at length by some of the people who were inside of it, including emails that were talking about how that strategy was going to be pulled off. In the room, there were certain moments where people snapped to attention, and I think overall the room was wrapped during Mr. Bowers' testimony. At certain points, people like Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy seemed to be nodding along, tightly smiling, almost empathizing with the emotion that he was giving to that testimony. And so certainly that was one of the things that we had been flagged to by the committee the night before, saying that this was the first time we were going to hear Speaker Bowers, in his own words, talking about the pressure campaign and the ways that he held fast against it. I do also think, though, that there are certain breadcrumbs that are going to become incredibly important as we move forward in these hearings and as we look at the role that other members of Congress played here. Before going into the hearing today, Chairman Benny Thompson said that they would detail in a few weeks, those were his words, the roles that members of Congress played. They've already told us, for example, that people like Scott Perry asked for pardons, that Congressman Biggs, who was mentioned there, also asked for a pardon. We're now getting a little bit more information about the role that Senator Ron Johnson potentially could have played. You were talking just before, Hallie, about those text messages. So that's going to be one of the key threads that people end up pulling on as we see what this looked like, not just from the state level, but from members of the very body that the committee is a part of here in Congress. So a lot of things for us to pull on here, and that's just panel one.
Well, and back with us, I want to just bring in the panel, Ali. Chuck Rosenberg, Joyce Vance, Frank Figliuzzi, Michael Steele. Chuck Rosenberg and the panel, I want to, Chuck, you and others on the panel have faced juries, and here the jury is public opinion. You've got a Republican Arizona official who had supported Donald Trump, and listen to part of his emotional testimony about his faith and how he told the former president and others on his team he could not violate his faith and his belief that the Constitution was actually divinely ordained. Listen to Rusty Bowers.
That the Constitution is divinely inspired of my most basic foundational beliefs. For me to do that because somebody just asked me to is foreign to my very being. I will not do it.
Chuck, if you were presenting this to a jury, how powerful is this witness?
Oh, he's extraordinarily powerful, Andrea. You know, we have a tendency, and I think it's a mistake, to demonize people with whom we disagree. And whatever your party, whatever your affiliation, whatever your politics, I mean, thank goodness that there are people in both parties, like Rusty Bowers, principled, dignified. His oath meant more to him than pleasing the person in power. I mean, he supports Donald Trump. He voted for him. Maybe he would again. But if you're an Arizonan, whether or not you're a Republican, whether or not you live in this man's district, whether or not you voted for him or donated to him, you're lucky that you have someone like that running the Arizona House of Representatives. Again, he's a very compelling, thoughtful, dignified, principled man. We don't have to agree with people to admire them, and I certainly admire Rusty Bowers.
So far we don't have the audio of the phone call that Bowers had with Donald Trump like we have the audio of the phone call. I hope you guys got that. I hope my audio was okay on. If it wasn't, we don't have the audio of the phone call between Bowers and Donald Trump like we have the audio of Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger. But Joyce, this is another example of a direct connection between Donald Trump and an elections and an official having a conversation about what is possible and what is not possible. And that official saying, I have to abide by the laws of my state. I have to abide by the Constitution. If you have proof of fraudulent votes, these dead voters that you say you have, if you have proof that there were illegal immigrants voting, send me the names and I will run it down. He was never sent those names.
You know, on the first call, Trump says, get the man what he needs, and he never gets it. Of course, it's possible that Trump could say, well, I was just listening to my lawyers, and they told me that there was a path in Arizona, a path forward. But Speaker Bowers is very clear about something. He's asked, did you tell Trump that there was fraud in Arizona? And as you've already said, Katie, he says, that wasn't my conversation. In other words, Trump is lying about this. So why would Trump lie about that if he really believed that what they were doing was righteous? If he believed that they had won in Arizona and that there was fraud, there would be no need for him to lie about what Speaker Bowers said to him.
Is there a he said, she said there, though?
There is a he said, she said.
He said in this case?
He said. As Chuck points out, though, who are you going to believe in the head-to-head matchup here? If you're a jury in a courtroom, you're going to believe Rusty Bowers. I think for the American people, it's difficult to discount this man's testimony.
I guess so. The question is this going to get to a jury in a courtroom? I mean, is the DOJ going to act on this? They've asked for those transcripts, but...
I don't think I would go directly to Donald Trump right now, but DOJ should take intermediary steps and work up the chain. That's the practice in these kind of cases.
Hallie.
Frank Figliuzzi, let me bring you in here as we look ahead now to the next part of this hearing today. This was a quick break, right? We've seen 10-minute breaks. This was only a 5-er, so presumably they'll be walking back in shortly as we take a live look in the hearing room. We're going to hear now from the folks in Georgia. Brad Raffensperger, Gabe Sterling, the Secretary of State, and his deputy. We're also going to hear from Shaye Moss, who was the elections worker in Georgia, involved in, I shouldn't say involved, let's see, at the center of what some described as propagated as a conspiracy theory. Basically, an elections worker who didn't really do anything wrong, but found herself the subject of threats from those on the far right who believed this conspiracy theory about a suitcase full of ballots, if you will. So, Frank, as we look ahead to the next piece of this, one of the threads that I imagine the committee will pull on has to do with then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. I want to point out, we heard from somebody who's very close to Meadows, Cassidy Hutchinson, and if my memory serves, I think it is the first time we have seen her on camera in these depositions. She is somebody who has reportedly spoken extensively with the January 6th Select Committee. And Mark Meadows here, as Adam Schiff has previewed, it is likely, Frank, that we will see some new evidence relating to Meadows and this plot in Georgia, if you will, his involvement there. Frank?
Right, and I can't help but notice that this is all looking increasingly like a kind of criminal enterprise. Trump at the head, almost a capo of an organized crime family. People like Meadows, people like Giuliani, people like certain members of Congress that we've mentioned, carrying out the acts, getting their hands dirty. And as we see more and more of that, it's going to increasingly look to me like a criminal enterprise. And that, to that effect, it actually helps us project what accountability might look like. Because to make the mob analogy, prosecutors and investigators, as Joyce alluded to, in those such cases, will try to make the case first on the henchmen, the capos, the consiglieres, the captains, and then rely on them either flipping or some further evidence developed to get to the capo himself. So don't be surprised if we see that kind of approach being taken, and don't rule out the possibility that those very individuals would be charged for their role in this, certainly first, and then later, if ever, you get to the capo.
And we've got less than a minute before they may be gaveling down. But Michael Steele, when we talk about this metaphor, the analogy of comparing the President of the United States to some sort of criminal enterprise, this is really striking to the American people.
I guess in some respects it is, but I think people kind of baked in the kind of man that Donald Trump is. I mean, it's not surprising that he operates in this space. And I think really, to Frank's point, what firms it up for me was Bowers' comment that, quote, we got, in his conversation with Giuliani, we got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. So you can see how all this was being baked together and how at the center of it was Donald Trump.